Hello and welcome back to Tech Talks. I'm your host, Brendan, a member of CSE Society here at UC San Diego. Today I'm joined by two maintainers of the open source project Mesa. So to start off, can you both introduce yourself and talk about your roles with Mesa?
Yeah, I'm Jackie Kazil, and I am one of the individuals who founded Mesa and a core maintainer.
And, I'm Tom Pike. I joined Mesa later when I was going through my PhD at George Mason in computational social science, and started kind of contributing in 2018, and then over the years have become a core maintainer in Mesa.
Awesome, thank you very much. So can you kind of go into detail on like what is Mesa and why it was founded originally?
Well, I'll go ahead and start the founding story, and then Tom and I can both go over what is Mesa. So it was founded in 2013, 14. I should really look that up. By myself and another student at George Mason named David Mesa. And basically, when we were in classes, we were writing our stuff in Python, and the rest of the program was writing in Java. And neither of us cared for Java. So we took a handful of models that we wrote and basically abstracted common patterns from those models, and that became the sort of framework of very early Mesa. So that's how it started. And I had been a part of the Python community, so I had been an open source contributor and sort of well aware of the ecosystem and sort of getting those two things started together. Tom, do you want to give a description?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the goal for Mesa is that we're trying to make essentially virtual labs so people can explore complex phenomenon accessible, right? And just to kind of put that a little bit of context, I say, you look at like the AI ecosystem, starting with, just a standard like regression and clustering and stuff like that. They use like scikit-learn and TensorFlow and PyTorch, right? But agent-based modeling, and because of those libraries, we could just take, like on scikit-learn, like 3 lines of code, and you could get, a trained model going. Is that, try to make these types of very complex simulations as accessible as these kind of like early AI libraries. The challenge with that is, I would say, it's an order of magnitude harder, because you're trying to recreate, at least for a lot of the models that I've had the ability to try to recreate a population, right? You try to recreate an ecosystem. And so it's, incredibly complex. You're only ever getting like pieces of it at once. And so to make a library that allows for that to be accessible, where I think the goal is that, somebody in a matter of minutes to hours could put together a valid simulation of a phenomena of interest, is still the very lofty goal of Mesa.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. It's about making it easy.
Yeah.
And to extend on that a little bit, not only making it easy, but so we're not spending our time all rewriting the same thing. Now we've gotten to a point of maturity where some of the core contributors are able to focus on rewriting how the concept of time works and getting more nuanced in how the representation of time occurs within the framework, which that at the beginning, and when you're starting out like writing from scratch, you're just like, I'm going to just code my time and make it work the way I think it should work, and not really think about reusability or how this might be helpful to you in the future.
So you're kind of talking about the core of Mesa, but I also know Mesa has these kind of extensions where if you want to do very specific things, there's basically these other repositories that have been made for that. So how do the extensions kind of work in the Mesa ecosystem?
Yeah, so Tom has written some, sort of been a core author of some of 1 or 2 extensions, I believe. I'll let him get into those. But in general, if you think about Mesa, there is extensions from a core functionality perspective. And then there's extensions from a model perspective. So I always use the concept of if there was a school of thought around a particular way of thinking about the economy, you wouldn't want me writing that. Well, maybe, but you would want to get like the, hardcore economist writing that and sort of owning that piece of code, which then models how the economy works, or a couple of economists. So they can exist in sort of these, I would say, these two realms, and then I would further divide it into, there's extensions within that are housed under the Project Mesa umbrella, which the core maintainers sort of have an active role in maintaining. And then there are some that exist outside, or maybe they start outside and then we adopt them, but everything does not have to exist within the Project Mesa umbrella. Things can be built outside of it. Tom, do you want to talk about meta agents, and didn't you build 2 of them?
Yeah, so I would say I tried and failed. So a couple of things, other things have been successful, but the hard problem is how you kind of piece this whole ecosystem together so it starts to get some synergies and be self-reinforcing, right? And when you're dealing with something like the economy, right, or fisheries in north of Ireland, or what have you, right? Like to Jackie's point, it's the expertise that's necessary to bring that all together, and with a goal of like just making it easy, right? Is that we're still struggling with that hard problem of how do you create this ecosystem that allows essentially plugins and add-ons, right? And identify hey, these things are pretty core. We want to kind of keep that very tightly. I would say tightly, but we want to kind of endorse it through Mesa. Say that hey, we're going to keep these updated, which is still a very hard problem, right? In order to have, maybe the building, I would say the building blocks, but the pieces of the ecosystem that are most used and most interdependent. But it is, I would say that is still a very hard problem that we're struggling with. So a while ago, I started Mesa behaviors and Mesa, I would say like Mesa utilities or something like that. And it's just like, it never reached any type of critical mass. Currently, EWA, one of our other maintainers, is looking at, okay, this mono repo concept with, Mesa modules, right? And then it's like, okay, what does the core Mesa really look like so things can easily plug into it, right? And then how do we have essentially, or how are, I would say, we have, but how are there communities of interest, right, that are able to plug into that? I mean, just think of it like you have Python, but then you have pandas and you have NumPy, right? And then you have other more esoteric libraries like the Python crop simulation environment, right? So I think we're trying to figure out how to make a kind of mini ecosystem like that, where you have core Mesa and there's some critical libraries like Mesa Geo. I think Mesa LLMs go in that direction, and like Mesa examples, right? And those really make like the core, like Python, NumPy, pandas, right? But then as you kind of branch out, there's other things, right? So, I built one. So to that end, and since Jackie mentioned meta agents, which has always been one of my pet projects I never have time for, right? Is like, how do you have these intricate adaptive networks that can turn on and turn off, right? So it's not like, so you have a family, I have networks that are activated, right? But then when I go to work, right, that's another, my work network's activated, and all those are kind of captured in these, for lack of a better description, kind of organizational agents. So it's easier again to capture these complex problems. But, so, and really the point of this is it is a non-trivial challenge to figure out what's the optimal way to set up that ecosystem. So currently, meta agents is part of the experimental block, which theoretically could go to core Mesa, but work with EWAT because they're trying to really figure out how to get the ecosystem, this ecosystem idea over the hump, right? Is we'll probably pull that out and use that as one of the first efforts at a reattempt at what I tried earlier and didn't work, which is Mesa modules, right? So it's a really, yeah, it's a hard problem, but I always go back to the purpose. If we're making agent-based models easy, right, and people could just throw together, you need this kind of rich ecosystem so people could just find these compatible libraries and rapidly build an ecosystem, rapidly build a society, rapidly build a business, right, or a supply chain or whatever.
You kind of just went over, all these thought processes that you go through when building this tool. But to kind of expand on that, like what goes into maintaining such a large open source project? What does your day-to-day look like?
Chaos.
Yeah.
So everyone has a day job. Not most people do not include this or aren't able to include contributions into their day job. That's sort of the dream. And so everyone is sort of working on this after hours. And I think over time we've kind of divided into like little areas with unofficial leads to sort of develop out or focus on that area. So yeah, but I think that's one of the fundamental problems with open source in general is the sort of lack of pay and just, projects continuing to mature and needing people to contribute for the, good faith and goodwill of it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, to kind of pile on to what Jackie said, and I'll give Jackie and David credit for this, is when they started, they always were like, well, we want this to be able to outlive us, right? It was always about the goal, not the people. And so that's why it's, under Mesa and not under, Jackie Kazil's GitHub, right? And we've seen over the years, like time and again, people will come up with Agent Pi or Pi Agent or some variant thereof, and try and start from scratch their own library, right? But it's always part of their repo, and so far they've never really they've never made it, right? And I think Mesa's been able to continue to grow because it's had that staying power, because the idea was always bigger. I think the point where I would say we're at, and Jackie, feel free to contradict me, is it's I think GSOC has been a huge boon to us in getting contributors and getting knowledge out there that Mesa exists. Undoubtedly, kind of like Mesa's gone through ups and downs. We've had some of our key contributors. We had a contributor today say, "Hey, he's going through this person's dealing with some other stuff right now, so they're going to back away for a while." And that's kind of, to echo Jackie, it's just like chaos, right? You're always kind of keeping it going on duct tape and baling wire. The bit I would say where we're at now, and Jackie and I are working on this, is we're at that point where it's like, hey, can we actually take this into over that hump where it could be somebody's day job and like a foundation type setup, right? So that's where we're trying to figure out if we can cross that obstacle, right? Where like a NumPy, like a Pandas, there's a little bit more to it, like the Python Software Foundation. There's some sustained, constant updating to it, where the people are able to dedicate more than the spare cycles they have in their days. So
yeah, Tom, you just reminded me a while ago when we were very nascent, it was David and I and another gentleman whose name I can't remember at the moment. We had a regular cadence, and then 1 month, 2 of us had babies. David and I both had kids, our first kid, and then the other guy bought a house and moved. And so because there was only 3 of us regularly working on the project, it was like the project just grinded to a complete halt for probably a couple of months during that time period when everyone just had life stuff happening. And the other thing I'll say is one major contributor besides now GSOC, which has been amazing, has been the the sprints that happen at PyCon. After PyCon US every year, they have a couple of days of open source contribution sprints. And I've been attending those for a couple of years now. And you'll see there's now there's so many regular contributions that you don't see the spikes anymore. But in early Mesa, probably for about 7 or 8 years, you would see a clear spike when there was a PyCon because so many contributions were made during that period.
And the other bit I'll add, just completely shamelessly, right, is that, I mean, really why I jump on efforts like this is because this is how you bring out the contributors. And I went to literally the same university that Jackie, in the very same small department that Jackie and Davey did. And I still vividly remember sitting at the Santa Fe Institute, working out my dissertation out there, and I found a bug in the code. I was like, well, I can't contribute to this. How can I do that? They've done this for years. I don't know what I'm doing, right? And I would say we have high standards in our pull requests, but really to just start contributing is it's wide open. And I mean, you can see core Mesa, the Mesa repo is very well maintained. And a lot of that's the passionate folks we have, particularly in academics that are doing that. All right. And so there's great leaders like Jan and Ewat that are really kind of pushing that forward. Right. But other things like Mesa examples and Mesa Geo, they haven't crossed that same point of core contributors that the Mesa repo has. So, I mean, the ability to contribute and immediately kind of become a critical member is pretty, let's just say it's not a crazy obstacles in your way. It's all volunteer. This is what we do, because we love it. We're trying to reach this goal. But it is if you have, I guess the point would be, if you have mental preconceptions about what it would take to become a maintainer or contributor to Mesa, I tell you, just start coding and contributing. And I mean, you'd be surprised how quickly you'll become an expert at the thing. And then I could go into long stories about how that is actually very much, when you look across the PyPI ecosystem, how all of them are heavy-tailed contributors, where you got a core group of people that are doing the vast majority of contributions, and then you got a lot of other people doing 1 or 2 contributions, and so I'd say it's not unique to Mesa. That seems, whether you're talking requests, the #1 library, or NumPy or whatever, they all have the same kind of contribution signature.
I think there was a requirement in a class once. Maybe I'm imagining this, but I thought there was a requirement once in some class where they had to make an open source contribution.
Yeah, no, there was. We get that in European universities quite a bit.
Yeah.
I know you kind of mentioned talking about the LLM module, the LLM extension. But I also want to talk about LLMs for actually creating code and developing open source software. So have you seen LLMs and their effect on Mesa as kind of positive or negative, or a mix of both? What has it been for you?
Well, I would say for me, I'll jump on this grenade for a second. So I would say for me, it's in general, it's a positive. I mean, for me, that bit was always, how do you get to a valid simulation of a realistic phenomenon to do better decisions as rapidly as possible, right? And I mean, in my day job, LLMs are taking us from weeks and months to hours and days to get stuff done. So I think in general, it's helping that. I think as it's helping to I think it'll be a critical enabling technology to help us get over that. I know when I use LLMs, when I code out a model, I only use them typically after I've created the core dynamics of the simulation, right? So we're working on a Pakistani, we're working on a Pakistani kiln model right now. So it's trying to recreate the brick industry to come up with policies to kind of get these people out of slavery, right? And so so pretty rapidly, I was able to say, okay, here's some critical dynamics in there, but I coded all that stuff out myself, right? And I'd use an LLM for chunks of, it's the Stack Overflow today. It's I need this chunk, I need that chunk, right? Hey, just give me that chunk. but to really understand the dynamics of, you know, this industry in Pakistan, like, or at least get the core pieces of it down, I did that myself, because it wasn't just like I had to understand what was happening, right? And an LLM wouldn't be able to bridge that gap for me, or if it gave me something, like, it could be just complete nonsense. It's giving me the right answer, so to speak, but without any understanding of what's underneath. But after that, I mean, getting a front end on it, doing all this other stuff was like, you know, again, took me a couple days to do something that if I was trying to code from scratch would have taken me, you know, months. So in general, I think it's good. One more quick point, and then I'll shut up, is that, and even now we're trying to figure out how to integrate that. You had a guy that's been, you know, kind of lurking, you know, doing some initial contributions, started a discussion today about, you know, how do we make our Mesa AI native, right? So, you know, with these LLMs now, you have these, you know, context things, so you use less tokens, and it kind of says like, hey, you should do these things, right? So big problem, you can always tell when somebody does a pull request with an LLM, because it'll use like old Mesa code that's deprecated, right? So it's immediately like, hey, we don't use this, you know, random activation anymore. That's been gone for quite a while now, right? But those are the models that are out there, so that's what it uses. So, you know, so now the question is, okay, well, how do we help people overcome that, right? And so build out these context, you know, markdown or YAML files that will make it easier for people to code. So short version, kind of a long rambling answer, but the short version of that, I right now look at it as a positive to help people kind of get engaged with ABMs and make simulations that intrigue them faster, right? And so hopefully we can help enable that by, you know, setting up our repos so they work towards that end and make it easier and make the LLMs more productive and effective in what they're producing.
So yeah, plus one to everything that Tom said. I think it's, you know, he touched on some of the issues that we've seen, and also some of the positives. The one thing I will add is I think about LLMs in the same way that I would think about codes. Obviously, this is all about patterns. When you abstract a piece of code and turn it into something that's reusable, you do that because that is not something necessarily that is helpful to you to be doing from scratch every single time. We don't need to build a UI every time. We don't need to like recode how time works, how, you know, how space works. You know, it's helpful to understand, in the same way that it's helpful to learn how to, I think it's helpful to learn how to do math without a calculator, so you can understand the core concepts before you use the machine to accelerate you. And so I think about LLMs in the same way. There is goodness to learning core concepts, but if you're outsourcing everything, then you are not going to understand how it works and conceptually what it's doing and what it's doing wrong. And I think the difference is between before LLMs and now is anytime you relied on an accelerator, such as an external library doing something for you, a calculator, any of those things, there was I'm doing this thing manually, or I'm doing all of it, and then I'm moving to this other tool, and now I will accelerate it. The problem with the LLMs is it's easy to, like, you're doing it within one space. I'm going to use it to help me with the core things that I don't really care about, like the framework, the structure, the outline. But it's so easy to go past that threshold and use it for the things that you should be caring about, like the fundamentals of how the model's working. And you don't have that cognitive shift between sort of dealing with one tool and then moving over to another tool, unless you're using two LLMs. And maybe then you maybe that's the solution. I mean, you force a cognitive like break in that this is the LLM I use for this, and this is the LLM I use for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that point, because like as a computer science student who's still learning a lot of things, if I often see me or my peers trying to use LLMs as like part of our classes and part of our learning. And often what'll happen is if you just offload a bunch of that, you show up at the midterm or the exam and you don't know anything, right? So there's like this worry of, at what point am I offloading so much to the LLM that there's no me left, right? Like I haven't actually learned anything. So yeah, I really like that point.
And I'll say, like, I mean, but don't get me wrong. Earlier today, I'm having a discussion about metadata inside the type of metadata that we should require to be associated with example models. And a couple of us have been going back and forth, and there's all these fields that we've been talking about. And at some point I was like, oh, this is like, I don't even know where we are anymore in the conversation. And I took the fields I proposed and I took the fields they proposed and I put it into an LLM. And I was like, tell me how these compare, because I didn't want to do the cognitive work. The cognitive work that it was important in that case was to take that and to sort of say, okay, agree. Yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of that. Let's go ahead and get rid of that, and then like, let's argue over this one thing. That was the important part, not whether I specifically match the two.
I have one last thing, and you've actually mentioned this multiple times throughout this. You mentioned GSOC, or Google Summer of Code. So Mesa is participating in 2026. So, what are you looking for when it comes to Google Summer of Code applicants?
Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, I could start. Well, I'll say this is our third year, right? Came out today that we got picked up again, which is great. And I would say every year we learn something new on what we're looking for, right? And how to do it, and kind of where we're at in that movie right now. I'd say the core has always been the same. Like what we're really, so first is, what's the purpose of GSOC? The purpose of GSOC is to expose people to the open source ecosystem and how open source works, right? And so that's really, like, it's less about what the end product is that comes at the contribution, or we're getting like free labor, if you will, and it's more about exposing people to some of the stuff we talked about here, right? Like, hey, I mean, you think you're going to count on, somebody, it's like, oh, I count on this person to do that, but we're all volunteers, and that person may have a work commitment or a life commitment or just something else that comes up, and they can't, necessarily follow through with it, right? And it's also, we're all volunteers, so you can't be a jerk to a person that does a PR request, right? So it's like always be positive, because they're freely giving of their time, or they're trying to learn, right? And you can't be disappointed if they're not at the skill level you expect them to be at, right? So first is that bit, right? Is like, hey, we're here for the purpose, which is like kind of outlined by Google pretty clearly, that it's to expose contributors and students, really students, to open source community and get them excited about like open source, right? So I think we try and embed that in there. Over the years, I think I think the measure of success that anyways I really use is, after GSOC, do they stick around? And I think we've gotten habits that have improved our ability to do that, where like year one, the one contributor stuck around for a while. Year two, the person who did Mesa Frames is still here, and actually the next year was a mentor, so is Adam, to another guy, Ben, who's been sticking around since GSOC ended. And I think, like, of our, I want to say four, like three of the four, I guess we have six last year. I guess it's like five of the six contributors have constantly popped in and done something else since the end of last GSOC. So to me, that's like our biggest measure of success, right? Is like, we created the right environment. They feel like it's challenging. They feel like they can contribute. So even as life gets in the way, they know that they can pop back in and still help out, or still contribute. Specifically on GSOC, I mean, I can tell you that one of the things we've realized now is, remember, we get a lot of AI slop, right? We saw that starting last year, right, where people just doing LLM stuff, and it's easy to tell, right? Particularly because LLMs are always outdated, and what their contributions are. And then the other bit is typically now, if you haven't been actively kind of contributing before the selection period, then it's you have a much harder hill to climb than somebody that has been, because it's, people in general are hard to understand, right? Like somebody can look great on person, and after a few interactions, and you find out that underneath they're really horrible people that you don't want to ever talk to again. So because people are complex and hard to understand, and you can put on a nice face for at least a while, it's typically, if we if we've seen your code, and it's and it's reaching some thresholds of stuff, it's easier to be like, oh, this person's really got a lot of stuff, right? So that, like, kind of knowing you and have you be active in the community beforehand is definitely a pretty big plus. But than coming in cold and trying to win over with a great proposal, right? Just because it's like, hey, this is a great proposal, but I don't really know how well they can code. I don't really know if they're going to be. And we had this with one of our contributors for a while. He was like so aggressive. He was essentially driving away potential contributors, right? And after a while, it was we had to help move that person on to other opportunities, right? And it was done with a mutual understanding, but how you interact with other people in the open source community is really, really important, because everybody's volunteers, and we can't have contributors that are scaring off other potential contributors, right? Like that, they would just kind of, go ahead.
Let me back some of what you set up with some data. I think last year we had 92 submissions. From those 92, I would say there were 10 solid people. And I can't remember how many of them were AI slop. There was somebody who submitted like 2 or 3 where, as soon as you saw the name, you just wanted to not read any further on the, you still read the first paragraph at least, but like you can tell either the code's out of date, conceptually the ideas don't match up. So it doesn't, writing AI, I think, can be used to help take writing that exists and ideas that exist and refine them, or edit the grammar a little bit. I think that is a powerful use of it, but sort of writing large chunks of it is not. It completely just gets you canceled. And then to Tom's point about the contributions, I'm not sure. We have 2 docs in our Wikipedia on our wiki and GitHub, and one of them is about like Google Summer of Code, sort of like an overview, quick start, a thing for candidates, and then in there's also it says what we're looking for, and then there's a GSOC. Another page that goes to a GSOC project ideas list, sort of the things that we're thinking about, that we have direct volunteers who are interested in sort of supporting mentors. And ultimately, I think last year we had 1 idea or maybe 2 that didn't fit in one of the boxes we put forward. And while it was interesting, it was not interesting enough to replace one of the boxes that we put forward. And so I don't, it's kind of, if you're submitting something that's not in one of the boxes we put forward, there's a high risk that it's just going to fall flat, because you could be a great idea. And you could be like, no, this really needs to happen. But some of the things we put forward are a little bit more on the bread and butter side of longer term things that need to be done to really strengthen our foundation. And that's, I think, important to us at this moment. But going back to the contributors, what we found last year when we were trying to make our final decisions is I added, like, to the evaluation a column on who made contributions. And the strongest people who ended up submitting to GSOC were individuals who also happened to make contributions because they understood the project. And so it's not that it's necessarily required, but if you make the contributions prior to the submission especially in an area that you're interested in, then you're already sort of mentally wrapping your mind around how that thing works, how it can be better. And you really are understanding it, not just, I'm going to write a proposal and hope for the best.
Before we go, did you want to talk a bit about the workshop that's going to happen next week and kind of what the plans for that are?
Sure, it's going to be very easy, right? So the assumption is that people don't know a lot about agent-based modeling. We got a lot of our stuff's on Colab, so you can just spin it up in that way, so you don't have to worry about environmental variables and stuff like that. But essentially what we do is just walk through the introductory tutorial, which shows you key aspects of agent-based modeling and how to use features that are in Mesa. So it'll be very much a hands-on, like a tutorial to if you've never built an agent-based model before. By the end of the workshop next week, you will, right? With data collectors, and then you can explore your own exciting. In this case, it'll be a wealth, the Boltzmann wealth model. Right. So yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that did.
I want to add one more thing, because there's a key period over the next 6 days. I mentioned PyCon earlier. PyCon does offer travel grants. And PyCon this year is located in, well, it's actually pretty close. It's in Long Beach. But also they offer like travel grants include a free ticket, for example, and hotel if you need it or whatever else. And the deadline for that is I believe February 25th. And it takes 15 minutes to fill out. So I encourage anyone who wants to go and contribute more to the open source community to go ahead and fill that out and ask for the grant.